Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of my proposed tank tech tree series. I'm actually doing the Italians today. I should explain because I said I was going to do the Japanese originally. We were told a little while ago the priority release schedule was for Britain, which already had some tanks done, then Japan, then Italy, and France at some point. But Italy and France after Japan. We've since been clarified it's going to be American tank destroyers, Britain, then armoured cars and Japan at some point. I don't know where the armoured cars come into it. But the reason I'm doing the Italians is because the Japanese tank tech tree is taking quite a bit longer than I expected. And the Italian tank tech tree just happened to be almost finished. So I just quickly finished that off and I'm just doing a video on that. So I've got something out there. I've actually done the Italian and French tank tech trees before for the aviation. So I'll give a link to the. I had a bit of discussion in the comments section of those videos, and I was told about players who had done their own proposed tech trees for the Italian aviation. So I'll leave a link to that. It's a very well done tech tree. Haven't looked at it as much as I'd like to. I just haven't had time lately. But it does look very good. And I'm hoping these videos will help promote the Italian tank tech trees and ground forces, which are sometimes a bit underrated or forgotten, although they did come up with some very good designs. As you can see here, I've put armoured cars in. This was before the announcement we would get armoured cars, or before the Q&A about armoured cars. The reason I put them in was because it was something that Italy did quite a few good designs on. It's something unique. I think all nations should have some sort of unique line, such as with the Japanese having amphibious tanks, that sort of stuff. Their other strong point is, or their main strong point is their self-propelled guns and assault guns. The self-propelled anti-aircraft guns can also have some good anti-tank capability, if I'm not mistaken. Medium tanks, there's few of them, but they're not all great. Some of them are quite good. There's some, especially the first one or two. Well, the first one isn't as good, but if used right, you should be able to overcome these disadvantages and should do reasonably well with them. But before I waffle on too much, we'll get straight into the video. We'll only be dealing with the first 3 lines today, just before I get straight into it. The other 3 I'll be doing in the next video. But yeah, as I said, we'll get straight into the video. Now, the first vehicle we're looking at is the L5/38. Now, these were mainly armed with machine guns. Some of the early variants were only armed with 8mm machine guns or flamethrowers. Now, the reason I've got it in my tank tech tree is because, the same reason with the Mark 6C in the British tank tech tree, some of them were armed with 13mm machine guns. And again, I don't know the exact penetration, but these apparently did have some limited arm penetration capabilities. There was also a anti-tank version with a Solothurn 20mm anti-tank rifle. Now, this, I don't think it could penetrate that much. 20mm are like 300 metres or 200 metres. So it's mainly for against lightly armoured vehicles, so probably your very, very early reserve tier tanks. I think this would probably be a good place to start off with. But again, it depends on the penetration capability of the 13mm gun and the 20mm gun. May not be the best thing to start off with. If they haven't got enough penetration, then it can start off with another tank, such as the Fiat 3000, which we'll look at in a minute. But I thought I should at least include this so you're aware there is the possibility of this being in the tank tech tree, or I feel it should be at least considered for the tank tech tree. Now, the armour was only something like 6 to 14mm, but it could do 26 miles per hour. So, fast little tank, not well armoured, but potentially could cause some damage. Like I said, depends on the gun, really. Moving on to the next vehicle, we have the SPA for Bertie AS42, hope I pronounced that right, which was based on the chassis of the AB41 armoured car. It was used as a reconnaissance car, because the Italians had seen what the British had used for their long-range desert group and wanted something similar. And it was armed with a variety of weapons. It's only an armoured car, but the variants, or different, not variants, but they could be armed with 20mm cannons and even a 47mm anti-tank gun. We could take the 20mm anti-tank rifle as well, but for 20mm I assume it'll be the anti-aircraft gun. I believe it was a Breda model, which was a form of anti-aircraft cannon. It doesn't particularly have much armour, I don't think. It's open-topped, as you can see, so it's going to be quite vulnerable, but it can do up to 50 miles an hour, so you have to use its speed to your advantage. Quickly driving in, getting a few shots off and driving off ambushing vehicles. It could, if used right, be quite a potent threat, especially with the bigger guns. I'm assuming the bigger the gun you have, the slower it will be. But, you know, that can pay off, especially if you do a lot of damage to the enemy. And, of course, we now have the Auto Blinder 41 and 43, which the AS-42 was based on. Now, originally there was an AB-40, but this was only armed with a few machine guns and maybe one cannon. But eventually the Italians decided to put a turret from an L640 light tank on the Auto Blinder, and it became the Auto Blinder 1, or Auto Blinder 41, or AB-41. And in this version it had a 20mm Breda and AA cannon again, and an 8mm machine gun in the coaxial and an 8mm at the rear of the turret. It also, interestingly, had a rear driving position, so you could drive it from either the front or from the back. I don't know how that would be represented in game, if you'd get two drivers or something, but could be an interesting thing to look for. Now, it only had about, I'm trying to find, 18mm of armour, so not the most well protected vehicle in the game, but it also can do 48 miles an hour, so, you know, that's only 2 miles per hour slower than the AS-42, and it has a big 20mm cannon, and, you know, a decent amount of armour. Now, later on there was an AB-43, which was basically a 47mm gun in the turret. There was also apparently a German 50mm gun in an open-top hull. You're probably seeing the picture of it now. I've put that in the premium line, I'll discuss that later. I don't think the AB-43 was ever used by the Italians, or I think it was mainly used by the Germans, because the Italians had obviously made the armistice with the Allies by now. Now, I've put the AB-43 in Tier 2 and the AB-41 in Tier 1, because obviously the AB-43 is more upgraded, you know, better gun. Don't think you can really have any higher reconnaissance vehicles. I'm not sure the Italians had any other reconnaissance vehicles, or tankettes that could really do higher than Tier 2. So that's really it for the tankettes and armoured cars, and we'll move on to the light tanks now. Now, the first light tank we're looking at is the Fiat 3000, an Italian-designed tank, and the first to be produced in Italy, or one of the first, but was based on the French FT-17. Now, the version I put in, the 3000B, was armed with a 37mm gun, 37/40, which I believe is to do with the length of the gun, and had a 6.5mm machine gun secondary armament. And it could do 13 miles an hour and had 6 to 16mm of armour. Now, I've put this obviously a low tier because it's, well, first tier, maybe even the reserve tank, or one of the first tanks after the reserve, because obviously it's a pre-war design. It's not going to do that great, but you know, it should do well enough, hopefully. I don't know the performance of that gun in particular. I will try and find some more information on it. But hopefully it can do well in a low tier. You know, I think it would be a good starting point for the main proper tanks. Now, the next tank we're looking at is the Fiat L640. Now, this actually has a bit of a, well, I don't know if it's a downgrade, but it has a 20mm cannon. Now, it could, I don't know what the penetration value is of the Breda versus the 37mm of the Fiat 3000, so it could be a downgrade, could be an upgrade, I'm not entirely sure. However, it has 6 to 40mm of armour, so it can protect itself a lot better, and it can do 26 miles an hour, so it's faster. So, potentially trading armament for speed and armour, I think this would do reasonably well in the low tiers. It could be swapped around with the Fiat 3000 if needed. Yeah, and I think it would be a good tank for the lower tiers for Italy. Now, we're moving on to the medium tanks, and, well, so far we've only looked at the first two tiers, because the vehicles we looked at, armoured cars, tankettes, light tanks, obviously haven't got that great an armament or armour. The main problem is when we're looking at the medium tanks, is these are the best Italy had to offer, and they're not exactly much better. The first tank we're looking at is the Fiat M1139. Now the M stands for medium, the 11 is how heavy it is in tons, so 11 tons, and the year it was adopted, so 1939. This was like the Grant, the M3 Grant in a way, in that it had the main armament in the whole of the tank. Unfortunately, the turret had machine guns rather than something better. Only 100 of these were built, and I think something like I can't remember. Quite a few of them were, or a few of them were prototypes, so less than 100 really. Armour was about 30mm on the front. At the side, it was 14.5, and at the rear, it was 8mm, and various different thicknesses around the rest of the tank. The 37mm gun, well, the tank in general wasn't really good against the British in North Africa. The 37mm gun, I finally found the figures for it, from 100 metres could only pierce about 58mm of armour. Now that's a bit of a problem, because the British Matilda Mark II, the main infantry tank in use at the time, had 78mm of armour. Bearing in mind the penetration figure is for 100 metres. The Matilda Mark II from 450 metres could pierce 37mm of armour, so the Fiat couldn't destroy the British tanks from point blank range, while the British could destroy the Fiats from quite a long distance, not to mention being handicapped by the fact it didn't have a turret. Now I've put this pretty low in the tiers, about tier 1, because obviously it's not a good gun. It's stuck in the hull, so you've got to turn the whole tank. It's a bit like a not very good tank destroyer. And it was like that in real life. You know, they only 100 was built and they weren't used for long. Well, they were replaced as quickly as they could. They were used by the British when they captured them, but that was more because of a lack of tanks, from what I understand. Its speed was also 20 miles an hour, so a bit slower than some of the other tanks we've seen. Now, the Italians, of course, realised the shortcomings of this tank, and came out with the M13/40 to replace it. Now, this was better in it had 42mm to 6mm of armour, and it had a 47mm cannon, and it was in a turret, so already it was quite a bit superior to the M11, sorry. Unfortunately for the Italians, their industry couldn't really provide many of these tanks, only 779 being produced in total. Its top speed was also 20 miles an hour, but like I said, for the armour and gun it's got, that's not too bad. Of course, while it's a lot better than the M11, it still wasn't too good. The 47mm gun became obsolete quite quickly. You know, the Allies and Germans were upgrading to 50mm, 75mm guns, which is why I've sort of put these two tanks at the lower tiers, so their lack of armour and armament isn't going to be too much of an issue, hopefully. There was, of course, the M14/41, basically an M13 with a more powerful engine, allowing it to go to 22 miles an hour. Although, other than that, there doesn't seem to have been too much difference. The only reason I've actually put that in tier 2 is just so we haven't got them all bunched up in the lower tiers, or tier 1, although I would put it as a very low tier 2, or possibly even a higher tier 1. After the M14 was the M15/42. Now, this was slightly better. It had maximum armour thickness of 42. Oh, it's weird, my book says thickness from 42 to 14 with a maximum of 45 on the turret front. I don't know if that means like the mantlet or something. Secondary armament was pretty much the same, the coaxial machine gun and the bow machine gunner. But they also lengthened the gun. It had a length 40 instead of length 32 gun, which improved penetration quite a bit. I believe it could penetrate 78mm from 100 metres away. So and if it used heat, about 112. So already they did start improving their vehicles quite a bit. Unfortunately, only a few of these are made, about 100, maybe 150, because you know, 1942, the Italians had basically lost Africa by this point, or was about to lose Africa. Production, it says 42, but production didn't actually begin until 1943, so these are only really used by the Germans, and after the Italians had surrendered. Now, the next tank I wasn't sure whether to put in or not is the Fiat M1643. Now, only one of these were actually built. You can see it in the picture. It does look quite a bit different from, you know, some of the previous tanks. It looks like it has some sort of sloped armour, or at least angled. It was armed with a 47mm gun, and it had 30mm of armour at the front, 25 at the sides. So a bit less than the M1542. But it was also extremely fast, 34 miles an hour, and it had the Christie suspension. I believe the first Italian tank to have it. Now, only one prototype was finished. They did intend to put a 75mm gun on it, but the prototype had the 47mm gun. Now, I've put this just because Italy doesn't have many medium tanks. Without it only has something like 4 tanks, or 3 tanks if you're going by just mediums. So I've put that in. I think it would be a good addition. Not really sure it should be a premium, because there aren't many medium tanks, as I already said. No need to put one in as a premium, but if Gaijin can find information on it, I think it would be a pretty good tank to have in the game. A bit of a unique tank. Now, the next tank is the P40. Now, the P is actually for, as far as I understand, stands for heavy tank, but I've put it in the medium tank line, because Italy only produced one heavy tank to my knowledge, and don't really need its own line for one tank. Now, this was much improved over previous tanks. It had a 75mm gun, which from 100 metres could penetrate 90mm of armour with AP rounds, or 120mm with the heat rounds. So quite a good gun, a lot better than the previous guns. It also had improved armour. As you can see, it's sloped, although it still has rivets, so advanced in some ways, not advanced in others. I've heard the armour was around 60 to 50mm at the front. I've had to rely on internet sources for the armour, because my book barely gives the actual tank a mention, unfortunately. Although it does mention that it could reach speeds of 25 miles an hour, maximum road speed. So quite a bit faster than previous tanks, and quite a bit more armoured and armed. So definitely a good addition for the Italian tech tree. This would probably be where the medium tanks, or tanks in general, end, because unfortunately for the Italians, they signed the armistice with the Allies when the P40 was brought into service. Only a few were produced, mostly by the Germans once they took over the factories, who used them pretty much for themselves. I've put it low. I've put it mid tier 3. It probably could go to low tier 3 or even high tier 2. I can't see it being any higher than where I've put it. It's a good tank, although like I said, it still has some downsides like riveted armour. But I think it would be a very good addition for the Italian tech tree. Now, I'll probably leave the video about here. In the next episode, we'll look at the self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, and the premium tanks. But yeah, in this episode, hopefully you've got a good outline of the gun tanks and tankettes, armoured cars, light tanks that could be in the Italian tech tree. These aren't necessarily Italy's strongest sides. I mean, the armoured cars are actually quite powerful, in some cases more powerful than some of the tanks. Light tanks are reasonably okay. Medium tanks can suffer a little bit, but I think if they're tiered appropriately, they could do quite well. I think Italy definitely does deserve some form of tank tech tree, and I hope it will be introduced sometime in the future. And hopefully this sort of raises awareness about the Italian tech trees. Don't forget to visit the links I showed at the beginning of the video. Hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like if you liked it. Subscribe if you like these sorts of videos. Leave feedback. I could always do with more feedback. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.